November 23rd, 1942, 2:37 a.m. Guadalcanal waters. The darkness was absolute. No moon, no stars. Just the black Pacific stretching endlessly in every direction. Admiral Raizo Tanaka peered through his binoculars from the bridge of destroyer Naganami, leading a convoy of 11 destroyers and 8 cruisers through what the Japanese Navy considered impenetrable night cover. Tanaka had run this route dozens of times, the Tokyo Express, as Americans called it. Every night for months, Japanese warships had slipped down the slot between the Solomon Islands, invisible in the darkness, delivering supplies to Japanese forces on Guadalcanal, and withdrawing before dawn brought American aircraft. Tonight carried extra importance. Tanaka's destroyers escorted 2 heavy cruisers carrying critical ammunition and reinforcements. The Japanese admiral had no way of knowing that 120 miles away, 5 American heavy cruisers were already tracking his every movement. Admiral Willis Lee aboard USS Washington had been watching Tanaka's force since it departed Rabaul 8 hours earlier. Not through binoculars, not through reconnaissance aircraft, but through a revolutionary technology that the Imperial Japanese Navy did not yet understand existed. Surface search radar. The invisible eye that could see ships beyond the horizon, through darkness, through weather, through anything except solid land masses. On the night of November 23, 1942, Tanaka's convoy was about to disappear, not because of tactical brilliance or surprise attack, but because they were fighting an enemy who could see in the dark while they remained blind. This is the story of how American radar technology transformed naval warfare in the Pacific, turning night operations from Japanese advantage into American trap. It begins not with heroic seamanship, but with scientific breakthrough, engineering persistence, and the recognition that whoever controlled electromagnetic spectrum would control the seas. To understand why November 23rd represented such a devastating shock to the Imperial Japanese Navy, you must first understand what radar meant in 1942 and why Japanese naval doctrine had never accounted for this invisible revolution. In 1939, when the first experimental radar sets were mounted aboard American destroyers, the technology existed primarily as scientific curiosity. Radio detection and ranging, abbreviated as radar, worked on a simple principle. Transmit radio waves, measure the time for waves to bounce back from solid objects, calculate distance and bearing from the return signal. The reality proved far more complex. Early radar sets were enormous, unreliable, and provided information so crude that experienced lookouts often performed better than the machines. A radar operator in 1940 had to interpret green blips on a circular screen, distinguishing between enemy ships, friendly vessels, land masses, weather formations, and electronic interference. Training took months. Equipment broke down constantly. Combat conditions degraded performance dramatically. Most naval officers viewed radar as supplementary to traditional navigation and spotting methods. The technology might provide warning of approaching aircraft or rough bearing estimates for surface contacts, but real naval combat still depended on visual sighting, optical range finding, and human judgment. Radar was useful. It was not revolutionary. That assessment changed rapidly as war experience accumulated. American naval forces discovered that radar provided capabilities far beyond early expectations. Surface search radar could detect ships at ranges exceeding 20 miles under favorable conditions. Fire control radar could track targets and direct gun laying with unprecedented accuracy. Air search radar gave advance warning of incoming aircraft formations, allowing defensive preparations impossible with visual spotting alone. More importantly, radar worked in conditions where human senses failed completely. Darkness, fog, rain squalls, smoke screens. Weather that grounded aircraft and limited surface visibility to hundreds of yards still allowed radar operators to track multiple contacts simultaneously across dozens of miles. This capability proved particularly valuable in the confined waters around Pacific Islands where weather and darkness had traditionally provided tactical concealment. The Imperial Japanese Navy approached night combat from entirely different assumptions. Japanese naval doctrine emphasized superior night fighting through intensive training, tactical discipline, and technological advantages like superior optical equipment. Japanese lookouts trained for years to develop exceptional night vision. Japanese optical rangefinders and telescopes surpassed American equivalents. Japanese torpedo technology was far advanced. Most significantly, Japanese naval officers had trained extensively for night surface actions. Through the 1930s, the Imperial Japanese Navy conducted night exercises, developed night fighting tactics, and prepared for decisive night battles against the American Pacific Fleet. Japanese doctrine assumed that superior training and equipment would allow Japanese forces to engage and defeat American ships in darkness when American technological advantages like aircraft would be neutralized. This doctrinal focus produced remarkable tactical capabilities. Japanese destroyers could launch torpedo attacks in complete darkness using visual sighting methods. Japanese cruisers could engage enemy formations at night through superior optical fire control. Japanese tactical coordination at night exceeded anything the American Navy had demonstrated before Pearl Harbor. Night combat represented a Japanese strength that could offset American advantages in aircraft and industrial production. Admiral Raizo Tanaka embodied this philosophy. Born in 1892 in Nagano Prefecture, Tanaka graduated from the Naval Academy in 1913 and spent his career preparing for decisive naval combat against the United States. During the 1920s and 30s, he commanded destroyers and destroyer divisions, specializing in night attack tactics and torpedo warfare. When war erupted in the Pacific, Tanaka emerged as one of Japan's most capable destroyer leaders. His second destroyer squadron had participated in the Pearl Harbor attack, covering the withdrawal of Nagumo's carrier force. During early 1942, Tanaka's destroyers supported Japanese operations in the Dutch East Indies and the Philippines, demonstrating exceptional skill in night surface actions. By November 1942, Tanaka commanded Destroyer Squadron 2, operating from Rabaul to support Japanese forces fighting for control of Guadalcanal. The Tokyo Express runs had become his specialty. Every few nights, Tanaka led destroyer forces down the slot, the narrow waterway between the Solomon Islands, to deliver supplies and reinforcements to Japanese troops on Guadalcanal, while avoiding daytime air attacks. The tactical pattern was well established. Japanese destroyers would depart Rabaul in late afternoon, steam southeast through the Solomon Islands during darkness, conduct supply operations off Guadalcanal before dawn, then withdraw northward before American aircraft could mount effective attacks. Speed and darkness provided protection. American forces struggled to intercept these fast night movements through confined waters where aircraft operation was difficult, and surface pursuit was complicated by islands and reefs. American naval commanders recognized the challenge. Admiral William Halsey, commanding South Pacific forces from Noumea, desperately needed to stop the Tokyo Express runs that were sustaining Japanese resistance on Guadalcanal. Every night, shipment delivered ammunition, food, and fresh troops that prolonged Japanese defensive capabilities. American ground forces were fighting a war of attrition that favored whichever side could maintain more effective supply lines. The solution required matching Japanese tactical expertise with superior American technology. Halsey assigned Rear Admiral Willis Lee to command Task Force 64, built around fast battleships USS Washington and USS South Dakota, supported by destroyer screen and equipped with the most advanced radar systems available to the Pacific Fleet. Lee represented a new generation of American naval officers who understood technology as much as seamanship. Born in 1888 in Kentucky, Lee graduated from the Naval Academy in 1908 and specialized in naval gunnery and fire control systems. During World War I, he served as gunnery officer aboard battleship USS Nevada, developing expertise in optical fire control and long-range shooting. Between the wars, Lee became the Navy's leading expert on fire control technology. He understood ballistics, range finding, and the mathematical problems of hitting moving targets at long range. When radar fire control systems became available in the late 1930s, Lee immediately grasped their revolutionary potential. Radar could track targets more accurately than optical methods, calculate firing solutions faster than human operators, and maintain contact in conditions where visual methods failed completely. In November 1942, USS Washington carried the most sophisticated radar suite in the Pacific Fleet. The SG Surface Search Radar could detect large ships at ranges exceeding 20 miles. The Mark 8 Fire Control Radar could track multiple targets simultaneously and direct main battery fire with unprecedented accuracy. Most importantly, these systems worked in complete darkness, allowing Washington to engage enemy forces that could not even detect American presence. Lee's tactical plan for intercepting Tanaka's convoy reflected this technological advantage. Instead of attempting traditional night surface action with visual contact and optical fire control, Lee would position Task Force 64 to intercept the Japanese force using radar detection and radar-directed gunfire. American destroyers would screen the battleships while Washington and South Dakota engaged Japanese heavy units beyond visual range. The plan required perfect coordination between radar operators, fire control personnel, and gun crews. Radar contacts had to be identified correctly as enemy rather than friendly or neutral vessels. Fire control solutions had to be calculated accurately from radar data rather than optical observation. Gun crews had to maintain accurate fire on targets they could never see. Everything depended on technology functioning flawlessly under combat conditions. On the afternoon of November 22nd, ultra-intelligence intercepts provided detailed information about Tanaka's planned convoy run. 11 destroyers and 2 heavy cruisers would depart Rabaul at 1600 hours, steam southeast during darkness, and arrive off Guadalcanal before dawn on November 23rd. Lee positioned Task Force 64 to intercept this force in the confined waters between Savo Island and Guadalcanal. American radar operators began tracking Japanese ships while they were still 120 miles away. The SG Surface Search Radar aboard USS Washington detected multiple contacts departing Rabaul and tracked their movement southeast through the Solomon Islands. Lee knew exactly where Tanaka's convoy was located, what course it was steering, and what speed it was making, while Tanaka remained completely unaware of American presence. This represented a fundamental shift in naval warfare. For the first time in history, one naval force could track an enemy fleet continuously without being detected in return. Radar had created a new form of tactical intelligence that allowed American commanders to position their forces optimally, while Japanese commanders operated blindly. The electromagnetic spectrum had become a new domain of naval combat. As Tanaka's convoy approached the interception point, Lee maneuvered Task Force 64 into position using radar navigation. American ships could determine their exact position relative to known land masses, track multiple surface contacts simultaneously, and coordinate movements in complete darkness. Japanese forces relied on traditional navigation methods, visual sighting, and radio communication that could be intercepted by American intelligence. At 2300 hours on November 22nd, USS Washington's radar detected Tanaka's convoy at a range of 18 miles. The radar plot showed 11 small contacts, probably destroyers, and 2 larger contacts, probably cruisers, approaching from the northwest at 24 knots. Lee ordered his task force to intercept course, maintaining radar contact while closing to optimal firing range. Tanaka's lookouts detected nothing. The darkness was absolute. No American aircraft had been observed. Radio intelligence suggested American surface forces were operating near Guadalcanal, but Japanese reconnaissance had not located any specific threats. Tanaka proceeded according to plan, expecting to complete another successful Tokyo Express run using superior Japanese night fighting capabilities. The technological asymmetry was complete. Lee could see everything. Tanaka could see nothing. American radar tracked every Japanese ship, while Japanese lookouts searched empty darkness. American fire control systems calculated precise firing solutions, while Japanese optical equipment remained useless. The battle was decided before the first shot was fired. At 23:30 hours, range had closed to 14 miles. Lee ordered battle stations. USS Washington's main battery trained out, directed by Mark 8 fire control radar tracking the leading Japanese cruiser. The radar system calculated target bearing, range, course, and speed automatically, providing continuous firing solutions that human operators could never match in darkness. Gun crews prepared to engage targets they would never see with weapons directed by electromagnetic signals invisible to the enemy. Tanaka continued approaching, unaware that American battleships were tracking his every movement. Japanese doctrine emphasized rapid closing to torpedo range, where superior Japanese torpedo technology and night fighting training would provide decisive advantage. The convoy maintained formation, preparing for traditional night surface action against any American forces that might attempt interception. At 23:58 hours, range had closed to 11 miles. Lee gave the order that would revolutionize naval warfare. Open fire. USS Washington's 9 16-inch guns erupted simultaneously, hurling one-ton projectiles toward targets invisible in the darkness. The first salvo was directed entirely by radar, aimed at contacts that existed only as green blips on circular screens. Fire control radar tracked the fall of shot and calculated corrections automatically. The psychological impact on Japanese forces was devastating. Massive explosions erupted around Tanaka's flagship without warning. No muzzle flashes had been observed. No American ships had been sighted. The enemy was firing accurately in complete darkness from positions that Japanese lookouts could not detect. It was impossible according to Japanese understanding of night combat capabilities. Tanaka's cruiser Sendai was hit by the third salvo. 16-inch shells penetrated her armor and exploded inside the hull, starting fires that illuminated the ship and provided visual reference for American gunners. But the visual reference was unnecessary. Radar tracking continued automatically, calculating firing solutions faster and more accurately than human operators could observe fall of shot and estimate corrections. USS South Dakota joined the engagement, her radar-directed main battery adding to the devastation. Japanese destroyers attempted to respond using traditional tactics, closing for torpedo attacks against targets they could not see. But American radar tracked these movements continuously, allowing defensive maneuvering and coordinated fire from the destroyer screen. Japanese tactical advantages in night fighting meant nothing when the enemy could see clearly in absolute darkness. Within 20 minutes, Tanaka's convoy was scattered and burning. Heavy cruiser Sendai was sinking. Destroyer Ayanami was torn apart by 16-inch shells. 3 other destroyers were heavily damaged and retiring northward. The survivors fled toward Rabaul, abandoning the supply mission and leaving their dead behind in the dark waters off Guadalcanal. Tanaka's post-action report reflected his confusion and dismay. The Americans had engaged accurately in complete darkness without visual contact. American fire control had been impossibly precise for night conditions. American positioning suggested they had tracked the Japanese convoy long before visual detection should have been possible. Something fundamental had changed in naval warfare, but Tanaka could not identify what that change was. The answer was electromagnetic technology. Radar had given American naval forces capabilities that Japanese doctrine had never anticipated. The invisible eye could see through darkness, weather, and distance. Fire control computers could calculate solutions faster and more accurately than human operators. Electronic systems could track multiple targets simultaneously, while human lookouts struggled to spot even one contact in favorable conditions. More significantly, radar technology was improving rapidly. The crude experimental sets of 1940 had evolved into sophisticated combat systems by late 1942. American industrial capacity was producing radar equipment for every major warship, while Japanese industry lagged years behind in electromagnetic technology development. The technological gap would only widen as the war continued. Admiral Yamamoto received Tanaka's report with growing concern. The November 23 action represented more than tactical defeat. If American forces could engage effectively in darkness, one of Japan's primary tactical advantages had been neutralized. Night operations, the foundation of Tokyo Express strategy, had become vulnerable to American technological superiority. The electromagnetic revolution threatened to reshape naval warfare fundamentally. Japanese naval intelligence began desperately investigating American radar capabilities. Interrogation of captured airmen revealed that American ships carried electronic detection equipment. Analysis of recovered equipment fragments suggested sophisticated radio ranging systems. Technical intelligence indicated that American radar technology was far more advanced than Japanese estimates had suggested. But understanding the problem and solving it were different challenges. Japan lacked the industrial base to produce radar systems in quantity. Japanese electronics industry was years behind American development. Most critically, Japanese naval doctrine and training were built around visual combat methods that radar made obsolete. Adapting to electromagnetic warfare required fundamental changes that the Imperial Japanese Navy could not implement quickly. Meanwhile, American radar technology continued advancing. By early 1943, new surface search radars could detect small ships at ranges exceeding 30 miles. Improved fire control radars could track aircraft and surface targets simultaneously. Most importantly, radar equipment was becoming reliable enough for routine combat use rather than experimental application. The strategic implications extended far beyond individual battles. Radar technology gave American naval forces persistent intelligence about Japanese ship movements throughout the Pacific. American submarines used radar to track convoys and position for attack. American aircraft used radar to navigate and locate targets in weather that grounded Japanese reconnaissance. American surface forces used radar to coordinate complex operations in darkness and limited visibility. Admiral King, commanding American naval operations from Washington, recognized radar's strategic importance. He ordered accelerated production of radar equipment and mandatory installation aboard all major warships. Training programs prepared radar operators and fire control personnel for combat operations. Most importantly, American naval doctrine began incorporating radar capabilities as fundamental rather than supplementary to traditional methods. The Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944 demonstrated radar's maturation into decisive combat capability. American radar detected Admiral Ozawa's carrier force at ranges exceeding 200 miles, allowing optimal positioning for the devastating attacks that destroyed Japanese carrier aviation. Japanese forces, still relying primarily on visual detection methods, could not locate American carriers until it was too late to mount effective attacks. By late 1944, American radar technology had evolved beyond simple detection and fire control. Electronic warfare systems could jam Japanese radio communications. Radar picket ships could provide early warning of air attacks from distances approaching 300 miles. Night fighter aircraft used airborne radar to intercept Japanese bombers in complete darkness. The electromagnetic spectrum had become an American domain that Japanese forces could barely contest. The final Tokyo Express runs in early 1945 demonstrated the complete transformation. Admiral Tanaka, now commanding reduced destroyer forces from Rabaul, attempted night supply runs using traditional Japanese tactics. American radar detected these movements continuously from departure to arrival. Coordinated attacks by radar-equipped aircraft, submarines, and surface forces destroyed Japanese ships with mechanical precision. Night darkness, once Japan's greatest tactical advantage, had become a liability against an enemy who owned the electromagnetic spectrum. Tanaka's final report to Admiral Toyota was devastating in its honesty. American forces could track Japanese movements continuously regardless of weather or visibility. American fire control systems could engage accurately at ranges where Japanese optical equipment was useless. American coordination allowed complex multi-unit operations in conditions where Japanese forces could barely maintain formation. The technological gap had become unbridgeable. The statistical evidence supported Tanaka's assessment. During 1942, before widespread radar deployment, Japanese destroyer forces achieved approximately 70% success rates in night supply runs to Guadalcanal. By late 1943, after American radar systems became standard equipment, Japanese success rates had dropped below 20%. By 1945, Tokyo Express operations had become suicide missions with almost no chance of successful completion. Post-war analysis revealed the full scope of radar's impact on Pacific naval warfare. American forces equipped with radar achieved engagement success rates exceeding 80% in night surface actions. Japanese forces without equivalent technology achieved success rates below 30% in similar conditions. Radar had created a technological advantage comparable to air superiority in determining battle outcomes. But the technology's most significant impact was psychological. Japanese naval officers who had spent careers mastering night fighting techniques discovered that their expertise was obsolete. Traditional tactical knowledge meant nothing when the enemy could see clearly in absolute darkness. Training, experience, and doctrine, built around visual combat methods, were suddenly worthless against opponents who fought with electromagnetic senses. Admiral Tanaka, interviewed after the war, reflected on radar's revolutionary impact. The Americans had changed the rules of naval warfare without announcing the change. Japanese forces continued fighting according to traditional methods, while American forces exploited technological capabilities that made those methods suicidal. It was like fighting a sighted enemy while blind. The electromagnetic revolution that began with crude experimental radar sets in 1940 had transformed naval warfare fundamentally by 1945. Ships that could see through darkness and weather held decisive advantages over those limited to human senses. Fire control systems that calculated automatically outperformed human operators in accuracy and speed. Coordination systems that operated through radio waves enabled complex operations impossible with visual signals. Japan's defeat in the Pacific reflected many factors, but the electromagnetic technology gap was among the most significant. American industry produced sophisticated radar systems in quantity, while Japanese industry struggled to develop basic equivalents. American doctrine incorporated radar capabilities as fundamental, while Japanese doctrine remained anchored to pre-electronic methods. American training prepared personnel for electromagnetic warfare, while Japanese training emphasized traditional visual combat techniques. The November 23 action off Guadalcanal marked the beginning of this transformation. Admiral Tanaka's convoy disappeared into darkness, believing night operations remained a Japanese advantage. Admiral Lee's task force demonstrated that American technology had made darkness transparent. The invisible eye of radar had given American naval forces the ability to see clearly when their enemies remained blind. In November 2022, exactly 80 years after Tanaka's convoy was destroyed by invisible American gunfire, the United States Navy commissioned USS Constellation, a guided missile cruiser equipped with SPI-6 radar, capable of tracking hundreds of targets simultaneously at ranges exceeding 400 miles. The electromagnetic revolution that began in World War II continues today, with radar technology remaining fundamental to naval operations. Admiral Tanaka died in 1969, having lived long enough to witness the full development of the electromagnetic warfare capabilities that destroyed his convoy in 1942. His memoirs, published posthumously, included a final assessment of radar's impact on naval warfare. The Americans had achieved something far more significant than tactical surprise or technological advantage. They had gained the ability to see the invisible, track the undetectable, and engage the unreachable. In war, as in nature, superior senses determine survival. The convoy that disappeared on November 23, 1942, represented more than Japanese tactical defeat. It marked the beginning of a new era in naval warfare, where electromagnetic spectrum control would determine battle outcomes. Whoever owned the invisible eye would command the seas. Radar had made night operations from Japanese strength into American advantage, transforming darkness from concealment into trap. The revolution was complete, invisible, and decisive.